So I wanted to cover a couple of more points before we move away from using Grid here. And the first one is configuration. Now we set up simple configuration. We just used Firefox. I showed you where you can find the information to set up the JSON configuration, but just remember that if you want to set up your grid to have different nodes using different browsers, you just need to set that configuration. And in many cases, that's just going to involve downloading the proper drivers, just like we had already seen in the WebDriver module where we got Chrome working. And the same thing for IE, and then just setting that configuration of telling the node where those browser drivers live. And so you can test with a variety of different browsers on a variety of different platforms. Just remember to configure that. The next thing is parallel execution. We didn't look at doing parallel execution, and that's because it's really not part of Selenium or the Grid framework itself. It's a little bit confusing to some when they're expecting that if they use Grid, that their tests will just automatically be executed in parallel. And that's not necessarily the case. You have to do something to make that happen. So, for example, let's say that we wanted to run 10 test cases at a time, and maybe we had 1,000 test cases or so. We would need to, in the way that we run our tests, set up parallel execution. So in our solution in Visual Studio, perhaps we would spin off threads and we would run our tests, and they're all hitting that same hub, and that hub can execute them in parallel, but we're actually controlling the parallelization of our tests at the level where we're running them, or where the driver of the test is. We'll cover a little bit more of this when we get into the frameworks, but basically you're responsible for parallel execution. The Grid makes it possible, but you have to initiate it.